read this, right?
No.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the middle part of closing arguments. Our trial rules in Ohio state that the state of Ohio and the defense get the same amount of time, whatever the judge says it is. However, the state is allowed to split their time. In other words, Ms. Easter can go first, I'm then in the middle, Mr. LaPrenzi will then finish up. I am not allowed to finish up. So what I'm going to ask you is to please be attentive to what I say, and please be attentive to what Mr. LaPrenzi says in his final statement in closing. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the Supreme Court justices of the United States said many years ago that cross-examination was the greatest determiner of the truth that we have in our judicial system. And what you heard early on in the cross-examination of Chad Cobb speaks volumes. When Chad Cobb was asked, he was on the video, he was asked, did you and Erica plan to kill Ashley Biggs? And what was his answer? One word, no. He didn't hesitate. He said no. This is the state's witness. Now, what I'd like to do at this point in time is indicate to you that there was sufficient evidence, and then some, of Chad Cobb murdering Ashley Biggs. You have his oversized jacket, that camo jacket, extra large. You have the long pants, obviously for someone who is maybe over 6 foot tall. You heard that Chad said he was 6'2". We have the scuba knife. We have the taser. We have the tape. We have the face camouflage. We have the leaded gloves. Are those going to be used by a woman? Now, let's talk about a timeline. Let's go back to the testimony from various people. And let's begin with 2007. Actually, let's begin with 2005. That's when GC is born to Chad Cobb and Ashley Biggs. 2 years later, Ashley leaves Chad. That's in 2007. 2007, Chad also meets Erica Lyon, now known as Erica Stefanko. And for 2007 to 2011, Chad and Erica raise some children. Think about this family unit that Erica is part of. We have Chad and we have Erica. They met in 2007, they got married in 2010. They had 2 children. They had, let's see if I can get these initials straight, they had FC and KC. Previously, they each had a child by earlier relationships. Chad has GC and Erica has AS. So now there's a family unit of 4 kids and 2 adults. And this continues until about the fall of 2011. Specifically, I believe it's October 5th, at which time Chad finds out that Ashley Biggs has somehow gotten some type of temporary custody order, and this child is spirited away from the school. Now let's fast forward then to about spring of 2012. In spring of 2012, I believe it's when Ashley Biggs gets custody of this child, GC. This causes Chad, you heard Mom, Cindy Cobb, talk about he didn't do well with it. Then we go to, chronologically speaking, we go to June 21, 2012. One of the first things you hear is about a phone call to Mr. Travis's pizza shop there at 619 and Turkey Foot Road intersection. We hear that it's a female. We ask Mr. Travis, did he ever make a mistake about getting a phone call, which he thinks is a female, and a male walks in? He says, oh no. We asked him about, did he have a lot of phone calls, hundreds, maybe thousands? He said, yeah, never made a mistake. He always knew what person was coming in. Well, we never heard from Mr. Travis as to anything other than it's a woman, a female. Ladies and gentlemen, half the population of the United States, maybe more than half, is female. We didn't hear about whether this person, their age, we didn't hear what that person's race might have been. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not telling you that Mr. Travis is purposely trying to deceive you. I'm just telling you that people have memories that sometimes degrade over time. This incident happened 8 years ago, and I'm going to bring that up again as we talk about successive witnesses. Next person we're going to talk about is Cindy Cobb. Cindy Cobb is the mother of Chad Cobb. Chad Cobb is her only son. And in her mind, her future, his future, were all looking pretty good, except a couple things. He testifies on cross-examination that he's got a domestic violence conviction with who? Ashley Biggs. We hear from the mother that he was in the Marine Corps. For how long? Well, he gets out of basic training, and Mom says he leaves the Marine Corps under a general discharge soon after boot camp. Cindy Cobb tells us during her cross-examination that she hopes to someday get her son out of prison. This is the same son that pled guilty in February of 2013 to aggravated murder, life without parole. He originally was charged with aggravated murder with a death specification. If he had gone to trial, that death specification would have hung very heavily over that whole trial. Instead, he makes a deal with the state of Ohio. And he tells the state of Ohio that if they will drop the death penalty specification, then he will plead guilty to life without parole. And he knows at that point in time that he will spend the rest of his days behind bars. Yet, what does Mom tell us? That soon after he goes to prison, remember this is early 2013, he files an appeal. Here's a person who's admitted his guilt, admitted that he beat, admitted that he strangled Ashley Biggs, killed her. And yet now he's trying to get out of it. How credible is that kind of person? That's for you folks to decide. Remember, I used an opening statement. And Judge Jones will tell you, and you've heard these jury instructions already, you are free to believe all of what someone testifies to, part of what they testify to, or none of what they testify to. Cindy Cobb loves her son, no doubt about it. And as she said, wouldn't every mother or father want their son to get out of prison? And we asked her, wouldn't you do something, or just about anything legal, to get your son out of prison? And she danced around a little bit with that answer. Now, speaking of dancing around an answer, keep that phrase in mind when we get to Chad Cobb's testimony. Now, it's June 21st, 2012, 8 years ago, and Cindy Cobb and her husband get a phone call late at night, early in the morning, and it's from who? Chad. You'll hear in my recitation a little bit later about what he said from Mike Stefanko. As a result of this phone call from Chad to his mother, they dash over to Mike Stefanko's house. Why? Because Chad says, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of Mike, but his phone's not being answered. They get over there, bang on the door. Mike comes to the door. Hey, Chad's trying to get a hold of you. They then leave. At this point, Cindy Cobb starts to become very familiar to this case. And we'll discuss that as we weave our way through this recitation. Chad Cobb, that night, tased Dr. Kohler, beat and strangled Ashley Biggs, Dr. Kohler. Ashley Biggs is put in her car by Chad Cobb. Remember, he pled guilty to his entire indictment. That indictment only had one name on it, Chad Cobb. He then drives that car to this area, farmland in the Doylestown, Rittman area. You saw the aerial photos, you saw the ground photos. You saw the access road, you saw the bridge, you saw the cornfield, the corner of which is bordered by a grove of trees and a Chippewa Creek. He hides it there. But what's interesting is that that property is close to whose? Cindy Cobb and Jay Cobb. Why does Chad hide it there? He knows that area. He knows it real well. Right afterwards, he calls whom? Who's the first person he calls? His mother. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about this tape. We have about a year after he is sent to prison, which is February of 2013. Now we get to about March of 2014. But prior to that, I don't want to take this too much out of order. I'm trying to stay in chronological order. But 2 weeks, not even 14 days after the homicide, Erica Lyon then gets an invitation from Mary Brinkman. And Mary Brinkman, a good friend, as it turns out, of Cindy Cobb, invites Erica to dinner. And I believe this date is July 1st, give or take a day or two, of 2012. Barely 12, 13 days after June 21st, 2012. She invites Erica to dinner. And before they go to dinner, Erica and Mary Brinkman go to the store and they each buy a quantity of alcohol. You heard Mary Brinkman tell you that Erica buys a 6-pack of Smirnoff Screwdriver. Mary says she thinks, when I suggest to her, was it the Mike's Hard Lemonade? She says, yeah, that's right, I did get that. And they have this dinner, but they send the children away. Remember, she has 7 kids. And her husband, Ben, are now alone in the basement. So it's Ben and Mary on one side and Erica Lyon on the other side. And then Mary tells us that Erica makes some really strange comments. She never admits making a phone call. And this is supposed to be a social gathering. It's 10 or 11 days after Erica Lyon has seen her husband put in jail, charged with aggravated murder, and she's had her kids taken away from her. Yet Mary Brinkman says that Erica is acting gleefully. Well, this is a person who is good friends with Cindy Cobb. We know that for sure at the start. But as we find out later, cross-examination, that Mary Brinkman is a friend of Chad Cobb. She has visited him in prison. She writes to him. She thinks the justice system is not to be trusted. Yet, 8 years later, she can recite chapter and verse of what went on that night in their discussion. She never tells anybody for approximately 7 years about this conversation, alleged conversation, because she didn't think it had any value to it. Or is it because she didn't think it was believable? She didn't record it. Now we'll skip ahead about 2 years to March 2nd, I believe it is, 2014. Erica and Cindy Cobb have been talking. Chad Cobb's been in prison now for a little over a year. And some visitation issues have arisen. So Erica goes over to Cindy Cobb's place. Cindy doesn't go over to Erica's place. Cindy has the meeting in their barn, which has a bar in it. On cross-examination, we asked Cindy if she knew that Erica had been known to take a few drinks. She said, well, I know she can have a drink or took a drink. How many drinks did you serve Erica that day? Oh, just one. Here's a woman that is used to drinking a 6-pack of Smirnoff. Cindy has her there for 3 hours and I believe 1 minute. And she only serves her one drink. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's for you to determine the credibility of these statements. Now, we've heard various passages from that tape. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you to listen to that entire tape so you'll get the full context of what I'm trying to tell you. Cindy Cobb has said very plainly, I want to get my son out of prison as soon as possible. Would she do just about anything to get her son out? Well, legal. She says, well, every parent would. She kind of dances around saying, yes, heck yes. No, she didn't say that. So we have this conversation which is secretly taped. And if she's not trying to get her son out of jail by some reason or any reason, why is she taping the conversation? The conversation is taped probably because of Chad Cobb telling her to do it. You heard Chad Cobb tell you that, oh no, I know I'm never getting out of prison. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2014, he wasn't thinking that. He wasn't thinking that in 2014, 13, 15, 16, or 17. He wanted out of prison. The appeal didn't work. Okay, that was plan A. Let's go with plan B. Let's see if my mom can get her to make some type of statement on a recording. So, we're invited over to Cindy's turf if I can use that phrase. Her barn, her bar. The liquor is served. The tape is rolling. And it's supposed to be about visitation. But you heard Cindy say, well, maybe that was only half of it. The other half of the conversation is about the murder of Ashley Biggs. And she's there to try to draw in Erica to make some type of damning statements that will be plan B of Chad's master plan. The appeal didn't work. Let's see if I can drag Erica down to my level. So, Erica been drinking some. We know that she's had a tough time since Chad was put in prison and her kids have been taken away. We heard from Cindy, or at least Mike Stefanko, that she gets the kids back. We also hear from Cindy and Chad, and the theme is amazingly similar. They're both saying the same things. They both don't answer questions directly. Well, we did all this because we were afraid of the kids being adopted out. Baloney. We asked Cindy, who's got the kids now? She did. The adoption theory is a scam. Those kids were never going to be adopted out. The whole purpose of Chad's scheme is, if I can get Ashley put in prison, guess what? The way is clear for my mom to have all the kids. Erica, knowing that she's got problems with visitation, pacifies Cindy. If she pacifies Cindy by telling her what she wants to hear, she hopes that Cindy will then get control of who? Chad. Remember, Chad's purpose gets Erica out of the way. Grandma Cindy becomes the guardian. I get my visitation anytime I want, or as much as I want. Technically, as much as the prison will allow. It's curious that Cindy hangs on to this tape for 4 years. Why? Why doesn't she run to Detective Hitchings or any officer? Is it because she doesn't think that Erica really means what she says? So she hangs on to it. She says she forgets about it. She doesn't think it has any value either. And it doesn't. Because she is prompting Erica. Erica is feeding her information she wants to hear to get Chad in line with the visitation. Do you ever hear the phrase lip service? Where you tell somebody whatever they want to hear just to get out of their face, get them out of your face. We have a witness by the name of Chad Cobb. He testifies from the prison over the video. Once again, Chad, did you and Erica plan to kill Ashley? No. Then we ask Chad some more questions. Does Chad ever really admit to killing Ashley Biggs? He dances around all those questions. He's real happy to tell you about this supposed involvement of Erica, but he's a little bit shy about saying that, yeah, I pled guilty and I killed her. No, he doesn't say that. He admits to pleading guilty to the beating and strangulation, but he never really admits this killing of Ashley. Then he describes in great detail how that during this episode that Erica is there driving the Lincoln, so on and so forth, and that there's a tree there. We never really established where that tree is other than someplace near 647 West Turkey Foot, if it was there. And we hear that Erica drops him off, and that Erica is standing by the car making a phone call. Yet, what does his daughter, GC, tell us? That, oh, I heard a phone call by Erica while she was sitting in the passenger seat. Well, it would seem that father and daughter don't have their facts straight. Now, I'm not going to pick on a 15-year-old, but let's talk a little bit about GC right now. When this incident happened, she's 7 years old. And 8 years later, he comes into this courtroom and describes with unusual detail about this phone call. Yet, she tells us she was asleep the rest of the time. I talked a little bit a while ago about, doesn't your memory degrade over time? We asked JC about if she still loved her father. Yes. Do you still visit him in prison? Yes. Do you write him? Yes. Who does JC live with? JC lives with Chad's mother, Cindy Cobb. I would submit, ladies and gentlemen, that children of any age group are susceptible to influence. Back to Chad Cobb. Chad tells you that Erica makes the call to the pizza shop. Makes it standing by the car. Daughter says, no, she was in the car. Chad also told you that he called his mom and dad. They go over to Mike's. so Mike could get medicine for Erica. Strange. Mike Stefanko tells you that the first thing that Chad says when he answers the phone, I effed up. Doesn't say we, it says I effed up. And he's not asking about medicine. Notice how Chad tries to sanitize just about everything he says or does. Mike Stefanko tells you that after he says, I effed up, he says, do me a favor. Would you go over to my house and get some clothes? Doesn't say anything about women's clothes, Mike tells us. Mike says he doesn't tell us or ask about any children's clothes. He's only worried about himself. Chad Cobb and his sentencing never mentions Erica's involvement, if any. At a sentencing, when a person is standing in front of the court, the judge will listen to the state, what they've got to say. Then the judge would ask his attorney or attorneys if they've got anything to say. The last person that is asked for their statement, if they want to make one, is the defendant. And in 2013, Chad Cobb is asked if he has anything to say. He says a few words, never mentions Erica. Sometime in 2014, he gets a visit from Detective Hitchings. Detective Hitchings, he wants to know about any involvement Erica may have had. He's probably thinking, well, I've let some time go by. I'll try again. Chad sends him away. Doesn't mention Erica. Says he wants to talk to a lawyer. Not only does he not want to talk about Erica, but he's still got in the back of his mind, I'm going to get out of here. It's not until 2017 when the visitation problems reach some form or type of tipping point. At that point in time, Chad, and you've heard mention of this, writes a letter to Detective Hitchings. And when we talk to Detective Hitchings, this is December 2017, we asked Detective Hitchings, did Chad express any desire to either get out of prison or have his sentence lowered? Yes, he did. Now the wheels are really turning with Chad Cobb. The detective who has been on the New Franklin Police Department or its predecessor for 25 years. He's handled about 5 homicides. And he told us on cross-examination and possibly direct examination that he has not found in 8 years any scientific forensic evidence that points to Erica Stefanko. He tells us that they don't have any evidence that links this box phone with minutes from the Walmart. The next person that testified, which would have been Mike Stefanko. He tells you that he was arguably Chad Cobb's best friend. And that after Chad gets arrested, then he gets to know Erica even better. He knew her before. Well, Erica and Chad were married. He worked for Chad, worked in the Cobb Cable Company. And he was some sort of, it's my phrase, some type of field foreman. He thought he was a partner, but he thought then he was demoted as the company grew. He also told you that right after Chad Cobb was charged with aggravated murder, she wasn't gleeful. If anything, he said she was very distraught. Her husband was in jail, and the authorities had taken the kids away, although it was temporary. He said that Erica was a good mother. One of the reasons the kids were returned. Deputy Browning, he's a big Wayne County deputy. Been with Wayne County, I think, about 23 years or so. He's one of the first people, if not the first person, to see the car in the cornfield on law enforcement side. The very first person would have been the lady that lived on, I think, Poor Road, that saw at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning a car in the field. She ran her errands, said it was still there, called Wayne County Sheriff's Department. They investigated, and so he's the first one come up through the woods, comes up in the front. Good tactics. That's what you're taught at the academy down in Columbus, OPATA, Ohio Police Officers Training Academy. And as he's circling the vehicle, he sees a little bit of skin, maybe an arm or a shoulder, recognizes a body, calls his superiors. One of the things that we asked him on cross-examination if he saw anybody else in the area. No. Did he see any other vehicles in the area? No. We asked him about, did he see another set of tire tracks? And I believe his answer was no. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear from time to time that One of the reasons that there is 12 of you is so that you can use your collective memories to recall what was said on that witness stand. Detective Soraya testified, said he searched the backyard, and there was photos, the backpack, men's boots, stains on the knife, taser, and the gloves. And Miss Easter showed you those items, which it's up to you to decide whether those items would be likely used by a female or a male. Detective Staley then talked about, he took photos, talked about the stains inside Ashley Biggs's car. You didn't hear from either the BCI agents, Soraya or Staley, that they found any forensic evidence linking Erica Stefanko. For those of you who aren't familiar with BCI is, they're the similar people that on TV you see CSI Dubuque or CSI Atlanta or something like that. They're the ones that are at the microscopes, they test gunshots, knives, drugs, serology, and then they make a report. Dr. Kohler, she's been over there in the, what I first knew it as the coroner's office, now it's the medical examiner's office, that she arrived, I believe, in 1998 or 9, and then a couple years later, she became the chief medical examiner. So she's been there as the chief almost 20 years. And she put a nice presentation on your screens, and we asked her, matter of fact, she offered, I think, in direct examination that the cause of death was strangulation, and it took a lot of force for that strangulation to be effective. She also talks about the blood on the hands. She also talks about what are traditionally called defensive wounds. If someone is trying to fight off an attacker, sometimes they'll have cuts or bruising on their own hands, and sometimes they will find the attacker's like skin or tissue, skin cells underneath their fingernails. You didn't hear anything about DNA from Erica Stefanko there. Martin Lewis from BCI testified. Fred Powell testified about cell towers. We also had then Mike Stefanko testify. And he talked about his history with Judge, is it my understanding what my time left is?
You have approximately 15 minutes.
Fine, Your Honor. Mike Stefanko talked about his history with Chad Cobb, with Erica, and he told you that Erica was very distraught after the homicide, the fact that her husband's in jail, children taken away from her. And he talks about what kind of mother she was, a good mother, He told you that the kids that up to that point in time, June 21st, 22nd, 2012, that they considered him a father figure. He told you that he supported them, put a roof over their head. He also told you that he moved in with Erica. At whose house, by the way, Mike, is this house titled in? This is Erica's. He also told you that they had a child, a little girl. Her initials are LS. He then says that on the night, early morning hours of the 21st or 22nd of June 2012, he got a phone call after Cindy and Jay Cobb were banging on his door. He checks his phone, sees he gets, I think he said anywhere between 15 and 20 calls, but he'd put his phone on low so he could sleep. They leave, he puts his phone on full. A couple minutes later, Chad calls. What'd Chad say? I effed up. Not we, I effed up. Chad then asks him, how about doing me a favor? Go over to my house, get some clothes. Doesn't mention women's clothes or kids' clothes. He's cross-examined a little bit about the dissolution of the Cobb Cable Company. He tells you, once Chad got arrested and the word got around, no one wanted to touch the name Cobb. The business went down. Tells you that Erica wound up or dissolved the company. They sold off assets. He was asked if he ever got any of these assets. He said no. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that Erica Stefanko is a scapegoat of Chad Cobb. He wants to use her to get out of prison. He has in his mind the fact that he's in prison for the rest of his days. He is got his good friend marrying his former wife after the divorce. His good friend is now living in the house that he used to live in. And if Erica is found not guilty, then he doesn't see how he's going to see his kids again. So, I'm going to take care of that. Like I said, plan A was the appeal. That didn't work. Now I'll get rid of Erica. I enlist my mom's help. We get a tape recorder going. And if Erica goes to prison, then I will get, or more accurately, my mom will get Casey and FC. And I'll get all the visitation I want. Ladies and gentlemen, you have 6 charges to consider. They each have elements which I told you in opening statement, what I call subparts. And the law says that if one of those subparts is missing from a particular charge, then you must find that person not guilty. You've heard about reasonable doubt. You've also heard about presumption of innocence and burden of proof. And those have all been defined for you by the judge. But I would ask you to pay particular attention to the complicity instruction. And that complicity instruction says, among other things, that you have to, as part of aiding and abetting, you have to find a shared intent or purpose. You will also hear the statement or description that mere presence of a defendant is not indicative of guilt. Now, you have heard about the phrase beyond a reasonable doubt. It's kind of a fluid statement. It doesn't have any quantifying, am I okay here, Judge? It doesn't have any quantifying figure in there. It just says what the definition that the judge gave. I would submit that this is another way of looking at it. Ma'am, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Reasonable doubt. Let me get out of the way here. Can you folks in the back by the clock, see that? And the alternates? Judge, I think 2 of the alternates cannot see that. Would it be permissible for them to move? I don't want to get anybody sick, or I could hold it up. All right. For you folks over on this side, reasonable doubt. A person is not guilty in your mind if there's no doubt whatsoever about them being guilty. But what if, in your mind, possibly, in this case, she did it? Well, what do you still have? Reasonable doubt. What if you have in your mind, well, I got a 50-50 thought about whether or not she did it? But what do you still have here? Reasonable doubt and not guilty. Let's get down here to probably she or he did it. What do you still have? Some reasonable doubt. If you get over here and you're satisfied either that she's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, or there's no doubt in your mind she's guilty, those would be outside the not guilty. Alternates? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that Erica Stefanko is not guilty, and that Chad Cobb not only is the real guilty person, which the state agrees with me, but I would also argue that Chad Cobb has put together a plot not only to sink her, but his real reason here is What's his motive? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't thought of it by now, it's real simple. It's revenge. That's what he wants, pure and simple. Revenge. Judge, do I have any more time?
About 2 minutes.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I believe Mr. LaPrenzi might have a few words, if not Miss Easter.
All right, thank you, Desiree. Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes,
how much time does Mr. LaPrenzi have?
approximately 15 minutes.
All right. Can we take a 5-minute break for me?
Sure, certainly. Okay, fair enough. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the request, so we'll take a 5-minute recess so you can stretch your legs, use the restroom. As you know, we're very, very close to the end of closing arguments and final instructions. You are not permitted to discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You're not permitted to do any independent research, and no one is allowed to have contact with you. So we'll see you folks back in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much. All rise. All right, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. You can be seated as you come in. Thank you. Thanks very much. Just as a reminder, the courtroom was sanitized and disinfected while we were on that brief recess. Attorney O'Brien, you have a few more minutes if you'd like to use them.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the phone call that Mr. Travis received at the pizza shop, he tells us that it's a female, and yet he's pretty sure that it's not a male. Well, you also heard that from the Verizon person that there are cell towers, not only close to that 647 West Turkey Foot, but there are also cell towers out in Rittman and Doylestown. And who would be living in the Rittman Doylestown that is a female that you've heard her name many, many times during this closing argument and during the testimony? And that person would be Cindy Cobb. Remember, she has a vested interest in the outcome. She wants those grandchildren. And if she can get her son out of prison earlier, all the better. Now, you also heard about these tapes, and I touched upon it previously, but I want to go over it again. You heard that in a murder scheme. So, I would ask you to consider the motives of Cindy Cobb and Chad Cobb in trying to involve Erica in this murder. It was their intent, Chad's intent, Cindy's intent, to get some damning statements from Erica. And because of these threats and ultimatums previously made, she had to play ball. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, thank you.